Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Second Story Press event. We're so glad you could join us at OLA's Super Conference 2022. Today, I'm excited to be joined in conversation by Mary Fairhurst Breen, the author of Any Kind of Luck at All. I'm Gillian Rodgerson. I'm the managing editor of Second Story Press. So wherever you're tuning in from across Canada, we're really happy you could join us, and we'll get started shortly. All of us are situated on different territories, but the women of Second Story Press would like to recognize the ancestral lands on which we work and live. The building that houses our office at 20 Maud Street is situated in traditional territories, including those of the Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabeg, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We at Second Story have been privileged to work with Indigenous authors, illustrators, editors, and other collaborators in this publishing house, and we hope that the books we produce here can in some way contribute to the reconciliation process in our country. We would like to work with more Indigenous creators, editors, and educators, and we're committed to make those connections happen. Before we get started, I have a couple of details. The format this afternoon will include a discussion between Mary and me, and at the end of the discussion, there'll be time for questions if anybody has any. So you can type your questions anytime during the event, and we'll get to them at the end. I encourage you to ask questions and drop in comments as we go. Let us know if where you're tuning in from, because we'd like to hear where you're all watching from. Also, if you can't hear us, please comment and let me know. Now, on to the main event. Mary Fairhurst Breen grew up in the suburbs of Toronto and raised her kids in an artsy, slightly gritty part of the city. A translator by training, she spent 30 years in the not-for-profit sector, managing small organizations with big social change mandates. She also launched her own arts business, indulging her passion for handmaking, which was a colossally enjoyable and unprofitable venture. Its demise gave her the time and impetus to write her family history for her daughters. She began to publish autobiographical stories and wound up with her first book, Any Kind of Luck at All. Welcome, Mary. It's such a pleasure to be talking to you today.
Good to see you, Gillian. I wish we were in the same room, but
I
that's
know.
okay.
I know. I wish we were too. Soon, I hope. So, let's start talking about the title of the book, Any Kind of Luck at All. Where did that come from?
That came from the old joke, if I didn't have bad luck, I wouldn't have any kind of luck at all, which was one of the jokes in my dad's repertoire. He didn't have a very big repertoire, and he repeated it a lot. So I heard that joke a lot during my childhood, but it seemed to ring true after a while. And when I thought about a title for this book, I was thinking about the fact that my therapist had told me he'd never met anyone with worse luck than me. And then I thought of that joke. So that's the origin.
Okay. So that tells us that the book isn't undiluted humor. And this is your first book. And what made you decide you wanted to write a book?
I didn't decide I wanted to write a book until, many years into the process. So I had wanted to write a very long note for my children, I guess. I just started writing
Uh-huh.
one winter. It was 2014, and I was trying to figure out what had, like, how the hell my family had ended up where we were. I was, my business had failed, my relationship had failed, I was on welfare. My daughter had been diagnosed with PTSD, anxiety, depression. She was in a residential treatment, in and out for a number of months. Really, things had gone to hell in a handbasket. And I was trying to sort out how we got there and how we could emerge from this. And I can only think with a pen in my hand or the modern equivalent of a keyboard. Um, so I started writing, and initially it was just for me to help make sense of things. And I would be writing, and then I'd see what I'd written and think, oh, well, that explains it. As if it was somebody else's life I was writing about. But sometimes you just have to see it on paper and then you go, oh, I get it now. So that's what I did. And I just thought it would be for my daughters. And I wanted them to know our family history because I do come from a line of really interesting, really strong women. And I wanted to document that. I'm the family historian. And sometimes I feel like that history is um, the best thing I have to offer, actually, my daughters. It's the thing that I'm standing on the shoulders of women who were really great, and that's, a big part of what keeps me going. So um, so I wrote this very raw emotional document, and then I left it alone for a bit, and then I came back to it, and I really enjoy writing. So I started picking it apart and turning individual stories into creative nonfiction, kind of autobiographical pieces. And um, after a while, I started submitting them here and there. And one of them won an emerging writer prize through the um, Ontario Book Publishers Association, and that was very encouraging. And then you heard me read a story at the Naked Heart Queer Literary Festival, and you were encouraging. So I kept doing that, pulling apart the stories, and published a few individual ones. And then I started um, reintegrating them together and kind of trying to figure out a balance of comedy and tragedy, because there's a lot of both in my life and in the book. Um, and it was just about a book. And then my daughter died. And I had to think about what to do then, whether to go ahead with publication. And I decided I would. And I really needed to write through the summer after her death. And I felt that she'd really want me to continue her work of being very public in an effort to destigmatize mental illness and addiction. Um, so I worked on it some more, and then it became the version that is published.
And it is very bittersweet. I mean, there are parts of it that are hilariously funny, and there are parts of it, as you said, such as Sophie's death, that are heart wrenching. And I wonder if you can talk a bit. You're very honest and forthright in the book about Sophie's struggles and about her life. And I wonder if you could talk a bit more about the decision to be that open and vulnerable about Sophie's life.
Well, I had already written about my father's mental illness, which was really debilitating, starting from when I was a kid. And then my husband, whom I married very young, Also had an addiction issue, which caused his death. So there was a lot of trauma and a lot of intergenerational um, mental health and addiction. And Sophie had, from the minute she was diagnosed, um, just been so honest. And um, she spoke to people in recovery from addiction. She was a volunteer at a safe consumption site. She volunteered at a community health center. She did everything she could to share her story um, so that it would help other people. And it was very effective. And I wanted to finish that work for her. I thought it would be a really appropriate way to honor her. So when she died, the thing that told me I was on the right track was that I published a very honest obituary saying that she had struggled with these issues and she had died of fentanyl poisoning. She was one of 25,000 people in Canada now in the last 5-6 years to die because of the toxic drug supply and our continuing ineffective and very dangerous drug policies. Mm-hmm. So when I published the obituary, the response was so unexpected. The media were interested, for one thing. I didn't expect to be fielding calls from reporters in the days after that, but I was, and I did talk to them. And I heard from people I'd never met who said, "Oh, this tells me something about my cousin's situation or my neighbor's situation. Thanks for putting words to it." Or, "My kid died, but I couldn't do it. I had to say died suddenly. I couldn't say how." And I just thought, oh, imagine being in such pain because you're grieving the loss of your kid, and you're suffering the pain of the internalized stigma, and you can't tell anybody how they died. That's just not, it's not acceptable. And that must be a very, very difficult path through grief. So yeah, so I did that, and then I published another personal radio essay, which also had a very positive response. And I just knew it was the right thing to do. And at a certain point, when you've had such a big loss, it feels like there's nothing left to lose. So why keep any secrets?
Yeah. And what do you hope? I mean, as well as the book being therapeutic for you to write, and I hope encouraging and entertaining and educational for people to read. What else? Is there anything else you hope will come out of this book?
Well, it's already kind of met my expectations, which were just the hope that people would be able to relate. And so many people have said, I picked this up because I have a family member who's dealt with whatever it is, mental illness or addiction. And I don't think there's anybody who's not been touched by one of those things, particularly right now while we're going through an opioid crisis and a pandemic, and everybody's health is being so severely impacted. So that's what I wanted it to do. I wanted people to be able to say, okay, well, I hear somebody else who's been through something similar, and maybe it'll help them find the words or just feel less alone.
I hope so too. And the book, Sophie's life and Sophie's experiences obviously play a huge part in the book, but it's also about you and your life. And one of the pieces in the book was the one that I heard you read at Naked Hearts, and it was kind of funny for those who haven't read the book yet. Mary was reading about growing up in Etobicoke and about going to an alternative school, and I recognized the school from her description in the book, even though she didn't name it. So, Mary, I've always said that C School, in a lot of ways, saved my life. It was such a necessary alternative to the big public high school that I had been attending, and I wonder if that was the same experience for you there.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't fit in at high school at all. I was very miserable there. I only attended the required number of days to graduate, even though my marks were very, very high. There's also a minimum number of days you have to actually physically be there in order
I
to
didn't know
graduate.
that.
Well, the principal drew my mother's attention to this. So yeah, so switching high schools where we were all kind of different misfits, but really interesting independent thinkers, was fantastic for me. And yeah, definitely made me feel like I didn't have to try to cram myself into that square hole anymore.
And I think this book will appeal perhaps to misfits, possibly misfits of a certain age, everywhere. And one of the other things you talk about in the book that I just loved was about coming out later in life. And I wonder if you wanted to talk a bit about that. I mean, it goes into some of your dating experiences, and both good and bad. And I think especially now when we're all living in the pandemic and many people have to meet others online, I think the section about online dating will appeal a lot.
Well, yeah, it was kind of just an easy evolution, actually. At no point did I really come out because I hadn't been in. I just kind of moved from straight-ish to like realizing I was bisexual at the very least, but married to a man and in a monogamous marriage, and there you go. And then when that ended, I still dated men for a little while, and then I dated women at the same time because I hadn't misspent my youth when I should have when I was a teenager. So I had to do it in my mid 30s. So that was a bit of an exciting time. And then I realized I just didn't want to date men anymore. Not like, and it wasn't an epiphany, it was just time had passed and I realized I hadn't dated men in a really long time and never wanted to again. So, yeah, so that was like 30 years ago. No, not 30 years ago.
Not that old.
No. Anyway, a while ago. I was in my 30s when this happened.
We'll say 20. That brings me to another observation in the book where you talk about aging. And again, that's not something people often talk about with a comic turn, but more to the point, aging in an economically precarious position. And what were some of the things that happened to you that you did that helped you to kind of adjust to those circumstances?
Well, I'm fascinated by this subject, actually. What is happening to women our age who were really the very first generation to have all of the choices that second wave feminism had to offer. I mean, our mothers didn't have these choices. My
No,
mother
I didn't.
had to quit her job as a scientist when I was born, and really suffered, really suffered as a result. It was terrible. I feel like it was a loss she never got over.
Mm.
But she could not do both. I don't know if she could have even stayed on if she'd asked to, like her bosses would have allowed it. But certainly, as a social convention, it was not an option. So, so many of the women that I know are like around 60ish or whatever, and thinking, oh, there's so much more life left. How am I going to use it? Because not a whole lot of us did the straightforward, one career, maybe one marriage. Like a lot of us have done a bunch of things because circumstances change. I mean, there are people of our age who were perhaps the last of the people to have one secure job that lasts till retirement. But certainly
It's unusual.
It's unusual now. And yeah, I was a bit ahead of my time being a precarious worker because I chose to work in the not-for-profit sector where the jobs would come and go, dependent on funding, which depended on who was in power. So there'd be an election, I would lose my job, and then there'd be another election and I'd lose my other job. And after a while, it was just so demoralizing. I went into business for myself, and that helped me lose all the remaining assets I had. But
I hope you had a good time doing it, though.
I had such a good time. But I'm really interested in hearing, like I found it interesting, and my daughter found it interesting to hear about the kind of financial part and what it means to be kind of undervalued as a woman over 50. Because when my business folded, I didn't have a master's degree, which had everything to do with not having had adequate daycare. And I was over 50, and everybody said to me, you'll never get another job over 50. And I thought, how can that be true? That can't possibly be true. Women over 50 totally have it going on. Why aren't we in charge of everything? But I couldn't get a job back in my field because a master's was the minimum requirement, and because of ageism. So I've had to really, I've ended up reinventing myself as a writer. I mean, it's very ironic because I wrote this book about my terrible luck, and it's helped my luck turn around because now I'm actually kind of a working writer. I published this book. I published a picture book. I got some nice juicy grants for my next book. And I seem to be on a bit of a roll now, and it's making me so happy. So maybe I do know what I'm going to do with the remaining third of my life, which is exciting.
It is exciting, and you deserve it,
Thank you.
I would say. And the book has been described as a queer feminist tragicomedy. And I mean, how, before you felt your luck was turning around, how do you keep the comedy bit going?
I don't know that I know exactly how. It's just a big piece of me. My mother was very funny. Her mother was very funny. We just all found each other very funny. And I find a lot of things funny. I mean, it's easier now because I have a grandchild who is hilariously funny because she's a toddler. But there are lots of things to laugh at, including yourself. And I guess I have a way of finding that. I dabbled in stand-up comedy a long time ago, and it was very exhilarating. And I really like my ability to make people laugh. I feel like it's one thing I do bring to the table, even if I don't have much else, like other people can lend me their cars and do, but I can make them laugh. So, yeah, it's really important to me to keep that going. And it's not every day, but most days I can find something to laugh
You're,
about.
you're good company and you're an optimist. And that is a trait that is very valuable. And the performing, you've had a chance to perform. I understand you're narrating the audiobook as well. Can you
I'm,
tell me about
I'm
that?
very excited to narrate the audiobook. Yeah, it hadn't really occurred to me that I could do that when Second Story said, "Oh, we're going to go ahead and make an audiobook." And I thought, well, some professional actors will do that. But then I had the chutzpah to say, could I maybe do that? And your colleague said, well, you can audition. So I did. So I auditioned and I got the gig.
Auditioning to play yourself in the book of your own life.
Yeah, yeah. And the good thing is we don't have to look up the pronunciation of anything.
uh, so was it a fun thing to do?
I haven't done it yet. It's
Oh,
about to happen. Yeah,
oh,
I'm going into the studio at the end of February with a director and everything. I'm so looking forward to it.
me too. I can't wait to hear it.
Yeah.
And you talked a little bit. You mentioned you have a grandchild who's hilarious. Tell us about your children's book.
Well, during the pandemic, well, my daughter Sophie died right at the beginning of the pandemic, right before everything locked down. And that was horrible and untenable. I couldn't just be alone. So, my other daughter and her family moved to Ottawa for a year for her partner's work, and I joined them. And it was a benefit to me because I had company, and it was a benefit to them because I provided childcare when the pandemic was, wreaking havoc on childcare and everything else. So I spent a year with my granddaughter Andy from the time she was 1 and a bit till she was 2 and a bit, and now we live in the same city, which is great. And with nowhere to go and nothing to do, we just wandered around enjoying all the things that are interesting when you're 32 inches off the ground. And I ended up writing this little story that was just about what Andy found really fascinating and delightful as we wandered around our city block in Ottawa. And it's called Awesome Andy's Best of the Block. And it's just a fun thing for each day of the week. And it's the kind of book that she likes. It doesn't have a plot. It's just observations and things that really appeal to toddlers, like ramps and A-frame signs that you can hide under, and diggers, stuff like that. So I had a lovely time writing that, and I did the artwork for it as well. And I'm hoping that will become a series.
Oh, okay. So it's Andy's conversation starters.
Yeah.
Great.
Awesome, Andy. And yeah, and I'm going to have more grandchildren soon. So maybe there will be more material.
Oh, I bet. Apparently, we have a question from somebody in the audience, and let's see if I can find it here. Oh, yes. Someone
Oh,
wants to know, what sort of response have you received from your family about the book?
that is a really good question and something I thought about so much. And I asked every memoir writer I could find how they dealt with the question of telling a story that's not just yours to tell. And I talked at great length with both my daughters about what was going in the book and what wasn't going in the book. And there are lots of things that aren't in the book, actually. Um, with my older daughter, she was very, very supportive, but it was going to mean a big departure for her because she's very private.
Mhm.
And she just prepared herself for that. And I'm so grateful that she was willing to do that, because she's just more private than I am, or certainly than Sophie was. Sophie, on the other hand, was all about truth telling, but also had strong opinions about details that were and were not going in the book, up until the point where she died. But that had given me enough guidance that I felt like I knew what she'd be comfortable with me sharing and what not to share. And then everybody else who's in the book was consulted about it. And it was actually a delight to talk to some cousins that I rarely see, to get a bit more information about my father's side of the family, because he didn't speak a word about his family, not a word. And they filled in some blanks, and it was so interesting for me. So yeah, anybody who was in it had a chance to read it. And I did make some changes to soften or make vague a few details. It's a really sensitive thing, and I didn't want anybody to be upset, and nobody was. But I know it's not. I mean, some people who write autobiographical material feel like let the chips fall where they may. And that's not wrong, but that's not what I wanted to do. So, interestingly, some members of my family, like a little bit, second cousins or whatever, were just shocked. Like, they had no idea what was going on in my home when I was growing up. Well, although they knew, they would have met my parents, and, but there were so many secrets. There were just so many secrets. So there were a few examples of relatives saying, I'm really sorry I didn't know what was going on. I'm really sorry I couldn't have been a help to you. So it's been positive. But I was also really careful.
Yeah. I think you have to make the decisions that feel right for you. And we have another question as well, I think. Oh, and it's a good one to end on.
Wow.
What can we look forward to in your next book?
Well, I got so interested in thinking about the impact of feminism on me, and the impact of misogyny on me, and the impact of so many things on me. Impediments to success, so shall we say. My next project that I'm really excited about is doing oral history interviews with women who were also born at the tail end of the baby boom, to just hear their stories about how all those radical changes of the 60s and 70s panned out for them. Did we have all this freedom, or was it just more responsibility and burden? How did those choices work out? It's so interesting to me. So that's what I'm hoping to start now. And I'm just finishing a book for middle grade readers, because I guess I'm trying to hit all the ages. Also based on oral history interviews with queer activists across Canada and in the US. And that has been a delight as well, hearing all of those diverse voices. Yeah. It's all going to be nonfiction. I love hearing people's stories.
Guidebooks for taking over the world.
That's right.
Thank you very much, Mary Fairhurst Breen, for a great conversation. It's always so good to talk to you.
Thanks, Gillian.
And thank you to everybody for tuning in. And don't forget, you can pick up a copy of Any Kind of Luck at All from your local library or indie bookstore. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the afternoon, and be well. Thanks, Mary.
Bye.
Hope to see you in real life soon.